Hello and welcome to the trade setup. In this video we are looking at NuScale power. It is time for another update, and today we witnessed something quite impressive where in the previous video we had a very specific requirement to be able to track this structure in a larger uptrend continuation, and as we were headed into the last level of resistance that I provided you here in the tiny time frame, we also were looking for this area of support for continuation higher. And as we had here a potential ABC movement to be formed, we actually needed to see a very sharp push to the upside. And I mentioned this in the previous video, that for this structure to still manage to form a more reliable structure, this would need to be tracked as a series of 1-2 setups instead. Yeah, and then here have a 1-2 setup, and I would still need to not see a break below the 50% retracement most likely, because that would already signal weakness and that it would not manage to have a more direct breakout. But surely enough, it did get it. It even managed to break through the blue area of support that we were tracking in one of the possible bearish interpretations, as there are actually quite many on this chart. And we will be discussing more about this structure in a moment, but before we get there, I would like to get to the larger time frame for any of you who might be new to also provide some context, and I will also even remove this blue interpretation since it did fail to hold and it is not valid anymore. Now, on this larger scale, we have been tracking this idea of a 1-2-1-2 setup where we would have liked to see a third wave unfold to the upside afterwards. Now, for this interpretation, we had the area of support in white that would have allowed us to track this with high probability, and a break below it would signal that this structure is more likely to fail than not. And that is why, since we actually did start trending a little bit below the area of support, we provided this yellow interpretation for a larger correction in a 1-2 setup. And this already signals that we should expect, after this push to the downside is done, to have at least a relief rally. Yeah, this is a high probability expectation, but we should expect another 5-wave move to the downside within this interpretation afterwards, yeah? And even though we had the break below the area of support for nearly a week, yeah, it is a 5-day that this has been below the area of support, a 5-day period. It isn't necessarily a very sustained break if you consider how large this overall correction has been. Yeah, this isn't a very sustained push below the area of support. It wasn't even a very deep push, but it does certainly hurt the probabilities, and it did certainly make us consider a larger correction that is possible. And we need to be aware there are good chances we should expect to get into the larger area of support in yellow, but even then, again, we would still like to see a larger relief rally before we form the full wave 2 correction in the yellow scenario, because again, we would expect a larger ABC movement to unfold within this interpretation. Now, in the smaller time frame, for the white interpretation, we were tracking here an internal ABC movement for the correction in wave 2, and even though we may have formed the bottom and we may be in the wave 3 in white, or at least in the larger correction in yellow, there are still unfortunately many ways we could see additional lows even then, because unfortunately there is no confirmation at the moment that a more significant bottom has formed. So there are a couple of warning signs. Initially, we were tracking this to be a 1, 2, 3, 4th and a 5th. Now, within this wave 5 to the downside, we would have expected to form an ABC structure. And surely enough, I can even track in more than one ways this structure to be an ABC, yeah, even something like an ABC could work out still very fine, but also I can track this as a 5-wave move to the downside instead. And yeah, this is a warning sign because the structure does allow continuation even within a wave 5, even though we broke the blue scenario. Now, clearly we broke the area of resistance for the orange interpretation and for an internal extension as well, but nothing is really stopping us from tracking here a larger A wave down, yeah, that has formed here, a B wave up, and a C wave that could still come. And in such a case, I would need to watch here the levels between the $17 all the way up to, actually, did I add the last top here? But yeah, all the way up to the $20.1 level. And so far, clearly, we have gotten into the 61.8% retracement. We did get a quick rejection, even though we managed to continue in this trend afterwards. Now, this is only a slow point that manage to create the reaction and form a fifth wave afterwards, and definitely contributes to the overall structure of this pattern that we are tracking internally. But until I see a 5-wave move to the upside, this sharp push into higher highs isn't necessarily going to provide us a reliable trade setup, unfortunately. And yes, at the moment, while we still can extend lower even within this wave 5 interpretation that we are tracking in orange, what can also actually occur is that this would be still part of the wave 3. As we have a possible 5-wave move to the downside within this area, I could be tracking this wave 3 to the downside only as a wave A. We could have here a wave B correction and a C wave that could have formed. In that case, we would have an additional area of resistance. Now, to be honest, my preference is that we actually formed a more significant bottom. My preference is that we actually start at least the larger relief rally, but I would need to see evidence that this has indeed happened, and until such is the case, I will continue to need to track internal areas of resistance. And for now, the main area remains here up to the $21 level, where a break above that level would signal that this structure is not going to extend lower within this pattern. Yeah, the fifth wave is likely done, and we shouldn't expect continuation within it, where a break even above the beginning of the wave 5, yeah, the wave 4 top, would signal that this structure is done, that we shouldn't, or not that we shouldn't, that we won't see continuation within the wave 5, and the continuation lower would be within a different pattern. Now, in the larger AEBC movement that we are tracking in yellow, we would still need to break this to actually have a chance at the wave 3 to the upside. Yeah, I cannot look for that with high probabilities until we actually manage to break here above the last level of resistance at the $42.5 level. And now that we have a more probable bottom, I can actually provide you this area of resistance. But yeah, it is going to be likely very difficult to get through. It is likely not going to form a 5-wave move to the upside until we get to that level. Yeah, not in a reliable fashion that we can track as part of the wave 3 as another internal 1-2 setup. And we will need to be prepared for this to form, yeah, something like this. And even though it will manage to break, it will be a high risk area that, yeah, even if we get into those levels, we would still need to see a break for a signal that this structure is likely done. Yeah. And while we have a clear gap here between the orange interpretation that allows extension lower and the yellow interpretation, unfortunately, even within this area, there is somewhat of a risk. Now, this isn't a preferred interpretation for me. It's the idea that this wave 3 has still been extending lower and we only just bottom within it. Well, in that case, we would need to be looking here for an internal wave 4 correction. Now again, this is not a high probability interpretation for me. I highly prefer that we have formed a more significant bottom, and if we aren't extending within this wave 5, I prefer to be heading into the larger wave B, but I cannot guarantee you that. Yeah, we may get only into this gap and manage to create a reaction lower, but I wanted to provide you the context of what pattern would be within such a scenario. Yeah, I would likely not be considering this. If we manage to break the area of resistance for the wave B in orange, I would likely not consider this as part of the wave 5, but as an extension of the larger 5-wave move to the downside, where this would have been the larger wave 3, we would have a wave 4 correction and then a 5th wave lower. But again, not a high probability interpretation, and I'm focusing here on this structure. Now, in the small time frame, as I was mentioning, we were tracking here, I mentioned this in the beginning of the video, but we were tracking here this idea of a series of 1-2 setups to form a larger wave 3. Now, I believe we have already topped within the wave 3 here, and we have even formed the 4th and the 5th. Now, the wave 5 could still easily extend to quite serious proportions. Yeah, we don't need to form a top anytime soon within the actual internal wave 5 to the upside, but assuming that we have actually topped, I can provide you here an internal area of support for such an idea, and here it would be between the $18.5 level all the way down to the $17.4 level, where a break below the 50% retracement would actually be a quite severe warning sign that this structure is not going to manage to form an internal 5-wave move to the upside. And again, as I mentioned earlier, unfortunately, even if we get here a 4th and a 5th, this structure would be quite difficult to track as a reliable 5-wave move to the upside, as it is quite sharp and realistically lacks the actual structure. Now, we can actually even look here, but no, clearly we have gotten to the ideal target within this wave 3, and we don't need any additional highs. But if I were to be looking even here, yet even more closer, internally, I could consider this to be a 1-2 setup and this a wave 3 to have a 4th and a 5th to complete this larger wave 3, but I would believe that we are very, very close to completion of this overall wave 3 and that we should expect here a wave 4 correction sooner rather than later. And of course, if we do form this pattern, if we complete it, we will be tracking a wave 2 correction, a larger 1-2 setup, but yeah, I would still like to see even further extensions within a larger wave 3. I would actually like to see a more straight push to the upside, although yeah, it isn't necessarily a very high probability, and we already start to see some divergences here in the smaller time frame, where clearly we have formed a more significant internal wave 3 top within this area, and while it can form a larger 1-2 setup, it's yeah, a bit unrealistic, to be honest. But for now, these are the levels, this is the trade setup. I hope you enjoyed the video, and if you did, don't forget to subscribe and let me know what else you want me to cover, and I'll do my best to do that in the days and weeks ahead. And until then, I hope you have a nice day, and I hope to see you in the next video. Bye bye.